Hi, Joyful Warriors. It's great to see you today for our monthly book club. It is our hope that the books we select and discuss will provide you with valuable resources to help you become experts in education and parental rights. The books we have chosen are specific to our mission and address the issues that you, our joyful warriors on the ground, face every day in your fearless advocacy. After October 7th, we have witnessed an intense and disturbing rise in anti-Semitic rhetoric, both in our communities and in our schools. We've seen college campuses overtaken by mobs of Palestinian supporters chanting from the river to the sea, social media bullying of Jews, and elected officials calling for a ceasefire which would demolish the nation of Israel. At Moms for Liberty, we condemn all hatred towards any group of people, and our Jewish brothers and sisters are no different. We decided to dedicate the month of July to combating anti-Semitism with a 3-part series, concluding with today's book club. If you haven't already done so, we encourage you to access our member exclusives to view our watch party of Killing America with filmmaker Eli Steele and the Anti-Semitism in K-12 training with Laurie Cardozo-Moore. Today, we are very grateful to be joined by David Bernstein, author of Woke Anti-Semitism. But before I bring out our author today, I just want to welcome all of our guests to the call and point out a couple of features. You can see your chat feature on the right-hand side of your screen. Please use that to interact with the other guests and send questions to Luke there. We will get as many of our questions answered throughout the call as we can. I must remind everyone that the opinions of our guests are always their own and may not necessarily reflect those of Moms for Liberty. Now, I'd like to welcome author David Bernstein. A passionate advocate for the free expression of ideas, David L. Bernstein is the founder of the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values, which supports viewpoint diversity, counters radical ideologies in the Jewish community, and opposes novel forms of anti-Semitism emerging from radical social justice ideology. David served as president and CEO of the Jewish Council for Public Affairs, a national umbrella for local Jewish advocacy. He served as executive director of the David Project, which educated and trained college and high school students in pro-Israel advocacy. He also held senior roles with the American Jewish Committee, where he began as director of the Washington Regional Office and served in management roles overseeing regional offices as well as national and local programming and advocacy. David has been a leading advocate for Israel's quest for peace and security on the legislative, diplomatic, media, and intergroup relation fronts. David, welcome to the Joyful Warrior Book Club. Thank you for joining us today, sir.
It's amazing to be with you all.
So many of our moms and dads and community members across the United States have been horrified to see the rise of anti-Semitism in America in the wake of October 7th attacks on Israel. We recently saw, I believe, 12 children were killed in a bombing while playing soccer on a field. These are horrible realities that Americans are often very lucky to not live with, but we recognize that many people in Israel live with this fear on a day-to-day basis. Can you bring us up to speed a little bit on the state of Israel right now, and just give us a bit of an overview of where we are right now as far as the political climate and the advocacy and the work that you're doing in Israel?
Yes. So we're not primarily a pro-Israel advocacy organization. We are about American ideas, but I can give you a background because I've been involved in this sphere my entire career and I follow it very closely. The situation in Israel is very, very challenging. And if you were in Israel, as some of my colleagues are now, you would be facing a very sort of bleak reality. Right now, Israel's probably wrapping up a war in Gaza that has taken much longer than many Israelis would have liked. It is a hard thing to do, not just to stop a bombing or rocket fire at the population, but to actually uproot the Hamas radicals that had initiated this conflict in the first place. They've gone into Rafah, even though they were told not to go into Rafah by many officials, including in the current administration, and yet I think have probably pretty much ended the threat coming from the top Hamas leadership. They're in the final stages of this now, and I think it won't be long before they can declare Hamas no longer a military threat to the state of Israel. Doesn't mean that they won't be able to reconstitute in any way, but I still believe that they've done a lot to sort of undermine their military capabilities. Unfortunately, they are still facing a major threat, a threat perhaps 10 times the size. They call it 10x in Israel, 10x the size of the current threat from Hamas. This is Hezbollah on Israel's Lebanese border. Hezbollah has exploited the conflict with Gaza in order to make life unlivable for Israelis. So something like 70,000 Israelis who live in northern Israel have had to vacate their homes and live throughout the country. They are living in hotels around the country. That's like the entire Pacific Northwest of the United States being uninhabitable because it's being bombed by a hostile power. That hostile power, Hezbollah, is a proxy of Iran. And I think sooner or later, we're going to have to come face to face with this tremendous threat. Iran is not just a threat to Israel. It's a threat to the Western world. It's a threat to the United States. It is using its proxies in Yemen, the Houthis, to fire at American ships in the Red Sea. It is a major threat. And it has actually made it impossible for international shipping to go through that area. So we have a major problem with a very aggressive Iranian state, and Israel now is on the front lines of this. And Israel must now come to this fateful decision. How long can it put off a war with Hezbollah? That war with Hezbollah, by the way, will be devastating. Hezbollah has about 20,000 precision-guided weapons that can hit Israeli skyscrapers. Now, Israel was able to fend off an Iranian attack of something like 300 weapons, but that's 300 weapons. Imagine if there's thousands. Some of those weapons are going to get through Iron Dome, and they're going to hit Israeli targets. And I think Israel's just sort of bracing for that reality and a very, very difficult war with Hezbollah that it will win, but it will win at great cost.
So, David, I'm going to stay on the topic of current events for a moment. We all witnessed as President Biden and Kamala Harris decided to not be witness to Benjamin Netanyahu speaking in front of Congress. I think that she spoke at a college sorority that day, and I think that was shocking to many Americans. You mentioned Rafah and the fact that the Biden-Harris administration did not want Israel to go into Rafah, but I understand that the hostages were found when Israel went into Rafah, and it's my understanding that there are still hostages that are being held, including American citizens. Can you give us an update on the state of the hostages?
Yeah, so there are hostages presumably alive. There's still something like 8 American citizens that are still being held hostage, or we don't know their status. It may be that some of those hostages have been killed, and one of the reasons why we're not getting to the bottom of this is that they've been killed, or that they've been mutilated or impregnated. Some suggest. So those are all scary prospects, and whether or not a hostage deal can be had with Hamas that brings back some of these hostages still remains to be seen. Hamas has in the past said it was willing to sign a deal, and as soon as we got to signing the deal, they had backed out of that deal. At this point, Israel is able to sign a deal more easily because it's basically wrapped up its war effort. Before, it would have had to suspend all its war effort in order to get the hostages out. That would have left Hamas in power, and I think that was a problem for many Israeli security thinkers and decision makers. So I think we're past that stage now, where Israel can sign an agreement, but I'm not sure Hamas wants one.
Thank you for that update. I appreciate it. And our prayers are sincerely with the hostages and their families. I can't possibly imagine the pain that the families have felt and continue to feel.
Yes.
We're going to move on a little bit to the book if we can. It's funny. I grew up in a very spirited household with a lot of debate. My father was from Brooklyn, my mom from Long Island, and our conversations at dinner were always very lively. We would have friends come over and they would always say, "Oh my goodness, your family is, constantly arguing about things." But it was kind of the nature of the way we talked about things, the way that my dad handled things. He liked debate. He stoked debate. He wanted us to think critically about a lot of different things. You say that debate has always been central to your life as well. How important is it in this time in America that we have lively debate? Even though it might be sometimes, I guess, a little uncomfortable for people who aren't used to it.
Yeah, it can be uncomfortable. I learned through debate. I grew up, I'm going to say, with mostly Jewish boys and it was mostly boys who screamed at each other and argued about, which baseball team would win in a World Series, or it could be about school vouchers, or it could be about whatever issue of the day was around. We argued about it. I understood that helped me learn, that helped me develop critical thinking skills. So when I had a family of my own on Shabbat dinner on Friday night, I would always raise a topic for debate. And sometimes the kids didn't want to go along with my topic. And they would raise a topic like, do video games cause violence? And they would say no. And I would say, well, of course they cause violence. And I would make the case, even if I wasn't sure what I really believed. I would play the devil's advocate role to the point where they would really want to kill me. And that actually, I think, helped them develop critical thinking skills. And I think that immunized them to some of what they are experiencing now on campuses where they go, because they've now learned how to think, not just what to think. And I think that's made them better students as well. So I think debate is so important to our children's education. And I seriously despair over the idea that we have some educators who think that they have all the answers. And their version of critical thinking is not teach our kids how to think, but to what to think. I had this argument with this woman, another argument with a woman who was clearly on the far left. And she says, well, I believe in critical thinking. And I asked her, well, what do you mean by critical thinking? And it turns out what she means by critical thinking is what some of the radical educators call critical consciousness. That is, that this idea that there are systems of oppression hidden throughout our society that we must then recognize and resist. And that's the version of critical thinking that she wants to teach my kids and your kids, and not the one that I support and that you learned when you grew up in an argumentative household.
So define woke for us. The title of the book is Woke Antisemitism. I've heard you define woke a couple different times. Define woke for us right now so we can understand what you mean when you say woke and woke antisemitism.
Yeah, I like how you qualify that, what I mean by woke. Okay. Yeah. So what I mean by woke are two basic pillars. One is that oppression and bias and racism and what have you are not just a matter of one's personal attitude, but they're embedded in the very structures and systems of society. They're in the air that we breathe. And two, that only people with lived experience, I'll use that in quotes, lived experience of oppression are capable of understanding what it is and defining it for the rest of society. Sometimes that's referred in this very technical term, standpoint epistemology. I don't recommend it to anybody, but it is a term that describes what we're talking about here. And so it has this sort of twofold. It asserts something that all oppression is ingrained in society, and two, you don't understand it unless you're suffering from it. Now, I think, like so many of these ideologies, sometimes there might be some point. If it were actually open for discussion, there might be some point. Is there oppression that people might not see all the time? Maybe, but you have to still argue about it. You have to still talk about it. Just because you say it exists doesn't mean I have to buy it. And so, you know, look, I grew up in Columbus, Ohio in the 1970s and 1980s. I experienced anti-Semitism. There were sometimes kids who would throw coins at my feet or write swastikas in my books and what have you. Now, if you didn't know that about me, or you didn't know that some Jewish kids experienced this, you might not understand what my lived experience was like. So you should listen to what I have to say. But I'm not the only Jewish person around, and maybe other Jews have had different experiences with anti-Semitism. And there may also be other data points besides my own lived experience that you should also pay attention to. So, for example, when the Pew survey shows that American Jews are the most admired religious minority in America, I have to take that seriously too. So while I know that there's anti-Semitism, I also know that an awful lot of Americans have very high opinion of Jews. And that factors into the way I think about things. This is an ideology that gives you a one-size-fits-all definition for all the problems. Why are some groups doing better than other groups? Well, we have the answer for you. It's systematic oppression. And to me, that's what I mean by woke ideology.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. So I know in your book you talk about a women's studies class that you took, and it was the first time that you were like, oh my gosh, this is really indoctrination, what's happening here. And you talk about the feminists who have brought about this moment of all of the gender confusion and everything. And how they, you know, they truly have kind of just brought this into the world, and then they don't really know what to do with it because they don't agree with it as it's kind of metastasized in America. I have questions about college campuses. Shai David, a teacher at Columbia University, I think you probably saw him. I remember seeing a video of him shortly after October 7th when the protests or riots had started at his college campus. And he was upset, and he was outside, and he was yelling, and he was saying, my children wouldn't be safe at this school. And I have to tell you, David, in that moment, I just thought to myself, you are an Israeli Jew. How did you not know that there was this happening, this festering on your campus? I think that's a question that a lot of Americans who haven't been in those institutions for a long time, or whose children are not Jewish and maybe didn't see it up close, how does it festered in the way that it has on our college campuses?
Yeah, look, I think there were a lot of signs that there was trouble, and some people chose to either not see them. Maybe they didn't choose it. Maybe they just didn't see them. Chose to downplay them, I think, more often. Well, of course there are problems, but maybe they're not as big of a problem as you're making it out to be. And it was only after October 7th when, you know, you had 31 student groups at Harvard condemn Israel for the massacre that they just experienced. And all of a sudden, a lot of American Jews were like, wow, I had no idea how bad it was on the far left and on the campus left. They just didn't understand it. They didn't see it. Maybe they didn't want to see it. And you know, look, I've been noticing this for more than 20 years. I wrote a memo that I quote in part in my book about my concerns with the changing discourse in the civil rights advocacy community, which I was part of. And I said, you know, it used to be that most civil rights organizations that I knew believed that America was sort of a half glass full. Yeah, it wasn't perfect. We were constantly striving to live up to our own high ideals, sometimes failing. That was the predominant narrative. And all of a sudden, I started to hear this narrative going back like literally to 2001 that that America is this pervasively oppressive and racist country. And I started warning my colleagues about it 21 years ago, 22 years ago, 23 years ago, I guess that is. And I wrote about it again in 2003, and I wrote about it in 2016. So I had been watching this metastasize. So when October 7th hit, I was not surprised by the reality. I was not surprised that these student groups rose up in the way that they did. Maybe it was a little more extreme and more sudden than I thought it would be. And maybe I thought we had a little bit more time before all this went down. My book was written a year before October 7th, was published a year before October 7th. So I thought this was going to happen, but we had maybe 5 years. And October 17th to expedite that reality.
So one of our moms, Brooke Weiss, who's a chapter chair in Charlotte-Mecklenburg County, is Jewish. And I remember she came to our first event we had with Megyn Kelly in 2021. And she had her Star of David on. And I remember her telling me then, like, we have a huge problem with anti-Semitism. This is going to be rearing its head. This is going to be affecting us and affecting Moms for Liberty and affecting our kids in this country. And, you know, not really knowing and understanding everything that was coming at us and dealing with COVID. I was like, okay, you know, I'm listening. And then but I mean, truly, I think we Americans have been horrified because anti-Semitism isn't just a problem for Jewish people; it's a problem for every person in our country. And so, you talked a little bit about a world conference that you went to that was against racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. It was held in South Africa, and you said that it descended into an anti-Jewish, anti-Israel hate fest. How is that possible? How do we have these groups that say that they stand against discrimination who end up being the most discriminatory or most segregated of anything, really?
Yeah, these are people who have bought into an extreme ideology. The ideology's been around. We described it some. It takes different forms. There's a post-colonial version of this, which believes that the former colonial powers, Western powers, continue to oppress countries around the world. It's sort of the global North is oppressing the global South. So that's the lens through which they're seeing everything. Any disparity, any problem, any act of violence committed by somebody who they view as part of the global South, the oppressed group, will be justified in any act done by the global North will be oppressive. So that's the entire worldview. Jews have been slotted in to the oppressor category. Now, notwithstanding our history, notwithstanding the Holocaust, notwithstanding the Soviet Union's campaign of anti-Semitism, notwithstanding what many Jews, including my mother, went through in places like Baghdad, Iraq, and the Middle East, doesn't matter. We have been slotted into that because our average household income would make us complicit in white supremacy. That's how we're slotted into that. And Israel, being a successful country, is slotted into the global North, even though many Jews come from the Middle East. More than 50% of the Jewish community in Israel come from Middle Eastern countries. So you get a sense that it really, the facts don't matter. What matters is this ideological lens that they're applying to everything. And in an effort to be in solidarity with others, they're willing to listen to the person who's designated the oppressed. So if it's a Muslim teacher, for example, who's saying, I'm being oppressed, I represent the oppressed, you must listen to me because I have the lived experience of oppression, they're going to get then in the eyes of these radicals and teachers unions, they're going to be deferred to on their views on the Israel-Palestinian conflict. And they're going to then be able to install that in certain curricula and in their teaching training and the like in schools. So I think that's what's happening here.
So you're talking about social justice. I mean, this would be that would be really the broader term for what you're talking about. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think it comes under a lot of names. The term social justice to me, I mean, if social justice means giving homeless people food, I'm for it. If it means telling me what my kids, what they have to think about the world, I'm against it. So I call it critical social justice is one term, or wokeness is another term. But they're using social justice as a defense for all kinds of radical ideologies, and that's what I oppose. I'm sure
so you brought up radical teachers unions. I'm going to bite because I agree with you. I do think they're radical. It's interesting to me that the head of the second largest teachers union, the AFT, part of the AFL-CIO, is a woman named Randi Weingarten, who describes herself as a Jewish woman. She's a lesbian married to a woman who I believe is a rabbi. But it's been shocking to see the anti-Semitism amongst the teachers unions in the lesson plans that have gone into the schools, very pro-Hamas or pro-Palestine, anti-Israel rhetoric. I think there were 7 different resolutions that were being voted on at the recent AFT convention that had to do with ceasefires and different issues when it comes to Jewish people and Judaism in general. So what role are the teachers unions playing here? I want to dig into the schools, David, the ethnic studies curriculum that we've been seeing in California, right, as you said, for 20 years. Let's talk about what's happening in the schools, but I want to, people want to know, where's this coming from? Because it's not coming from inside our homes.
No, teachers unions are one vector of transmission. I think education colleges are another vector of transmission. They've been really taken over by radicals and are then, spreading that ideology to teachers. So by the time they end up in the classroom, they've already often been indoctrinated. I think teachers unions are a major vector right now. And, I have to tell you, like, a lot of Jews were part of teachers unions historically. Like, first of all, there were a lot of Jewish teachers. I think if you went back to like the early 1960s, something like 60% of New York City school teachers were Jews and mostly Jewish women.
So interesting.
So we have a rich history in teachers unions, and most of us love teachers. Like we believe in education, so we love teachers, and we have all kinds of blessings that are specifically for teachers in the Jewish tradition. So it's hard for us to imagine that teachers unions would be radicalized, and I think we're seeing that both at the national and the local level now. The NEA, which is the larger teachers association, advocates for something called white supremacy culture. You may have heard of this. I'm sure you've talked about it, which is just crazy. It's the idea that if you come to school on time or work on time and you value that, that's a white supremacy value. That is officially endorsed by the NEA and promulgated by the NEA. And it's in our children's school system. My kids went to Montgomery County Public Schools in suburban Maryland, and
that's the worst of the worst, David. That's like the belly of the beast.
Yeah, and I thought for the longest time that I was the only one who was sort of watching with horror what was happening there. And, I know that there were some activists that were from, Moms for Liberty and elsewhere who were involved, but I didn't see a lot of Jewish parents. Later on, a few months later, I met with some Jewish teachers. And by the way, these are not Republican activists. These are probably liberal Jewish moms from Montgomery County, Maryland, who haven't voted for a Republican in their lives, who said to me, "You would not believe how bad it is right now. We cannot even question the radical DEI that's being done in our schools." So I think that many people didn't understand how this was getting into our schools, and they didn't understand that there were certain radical elements about, how we were going to look at student performance, how we were going to understand teacher performance or school performance, and that those things were directly related to how they were going to teach about the Middle East or how they were going to regard Jews. And that's why I don't even talk necessarily about anti-Semitism all the time. This is, to me, an assault on American and Western values. And Jews are the canary in the coal mine in it. We tend to be on the front lines of these, unfortunately. But this is a much larger assault on our values, in my view.
Let's talk about that. I mean, the Olympics opening ceremony, the mockery made of the Last Supper. I think Christians would say that they feel that they're under attack as well, and that Judeo-Christian values, as you said, Western civilization is under attack. David, I think it's hard for people to understand why that would be. So many beautiful things have been born out of America. We have, a beautiful constitution that so many other countries have, seek to copy and to put into place. Why is there such a force that wants to demolish and destroy Western civilization and Judeo-Christian principles?
Yeah, so it's been around a while. Like it might feel like it just emerged yesterday, but it's been in the making for like over 50 years. It found its way into the university. These are radicals that believe that capitalism should be done away with. These are, some of them. Not every soft woke teacher is that extreme, but many have been influenced by a larger ideology. And they've been in the works. They've been working behind the scenes. They've been taking hold of sort of the bureaucratic mechanisms of our institutions, and particularly our schools. So while many of us were saying, we hear something that was mildly problematic in our kids' schools, and we said, okay, well, that's a little nuts, but I'm not going to do anything about it because I don't want to make waves and my kid seems happy. And we made a lot of compromises with reality until it got so crazy that we could no longer abide by it. I think that's what's happened and why we're dealing with it now. And again, am I specifically concerned about the plight of Jews? I am. I'm Jewish. I have Jewish kids. I'm worried about what's happening on campuses, but I'm as worried, if not more worried, about America and how this is an assault on our values. And I think it's incumbent, by the way, that moderates and center-left liberals also reclaim patriotism in our society. Like, it's not enough that I don't just want to say, oh, they're all bad. I want to say, look, guys, the liberalism that I was brought up with was patriotic. I believed that America was the greatest country on earth. I might not have agreed with whatever president was around, and I may have my criticisms of such and such policy, but to me, America, the streets were paved with gold. My mom is an immigrant. The streets were paved with gold. And that's the narrative that I've tried to teach to my kids, and I realize that that's under assault.
It truly is. And so you talk a little bit about how Ibram Kenny's idea of equity is really at odds with Jewish tradition. Let's talk about this idea of equity. You're talking about oppressed versus oppressor. In our classrooms, what we're seeing is that children are being told oftentimes because of the color of their skin that there will be obstacles that we placed in front of them that they will not be able to overcome. I can't think of a worse thing to tell a child that somehow they're, unable to succeed because of the color of their skin or their religion in America. And so, let's talk about Kendi and equity and what and to be honest with you, Kamala Harris too, and this idea of equity and assuring equal outcomes. The idea that you might destroy the nuclear family in order to ensure equal outcomes is horrifying to many of us, and that was found in the Black Lives Matter original tenets.
Yeah. Equity is this version of equity is a very scary concept, and it is deeply ideological, and it is amazing that anybody ever took it seriously, outside maybe of a few crazy professors. But that's what you start to see in institutions. And when people start to read this book and say that any disparity among groups means that the groups that are on top are oppressing the groups that are on bottom, that the only acceptable explanation for disparity is discrimination, as Kendi argues, is going to be disastrous for groups that are on average doing better. By the way, including like Nigerian African blacks in America who have very good outcomes. I mean, are they now complicit in white supremacy too? How's that work?
Apparently, yes.
And so Jews, who are a group that are perceived as quote unquote privileged, are going to be under suspicion for being in bed with white supremacy. And that's exactly what you saw recently at Columbia University. And if you're looking for the perfect case study of woke anti-Semitism, it's that. You had a group of deans of Columbia. I went to thinking deans of Columbia who are watching the director of the Hillel, which is the Jewish institution on campus. He was talking about the plight of Jewish students, and they were sending each other texts like vomit emojis and the like about what he was saying. And we later recovered I think at a congressional request, we later recovered the entirety of the text, and they were saying that Jews are privileged. The Jewish students there are privileged. And so therefore don't deserve protection or aren't really being discriminated against because they're a privileged group. That's what we mean by woke anti-Semitism, that they're being defined by virtue of their identity as privileged. No matter where they came from, no matter what kind of household that they lived in, you don't know which kids grew up how. I mean, it's just an absurdity. It's the worst form of stereotyping, and yet they think that they're justified in making such claims. And that's with deans from a major elite university. So I think we've got our work cut out. And I think that it starts in universities, but as we're seeing, it jumped the lab into the larger society, and particularly into K through 12 education.
So when we talk about K through 12 education, we're going to get to some questions from our audience soon. So please, if you have questions for David, put them in the chat. We'll try to answer them. I know we have some questions from some of our chapter chairs, David. But I did an interview with a mom in New York City, a Jewish mom. She has 8 kids, and her children go to yeshivas in New York. And it was shortly after New York City Public Schools said that they wanted to close, I think it was 25 of the 28 yeshivas, because they said that the kids weren't doing well in school, weren't getting what they needed in the schools. And this mom was really challenging and saying, look at New York City public schools and the rate of failure that you have there, with only, I think, 14% of Black students reading on grade level. And, I could go into other demographics, but there's systemic failure, truly, in New York City public schools. And she was asking, what do we want for successful children out of school? What's important? What is it that we want? And when you look at the graduates of the yeshivas, they go on to have businesses and families and happy lives. And so can we talk a little bit quickly, and then we'll get to some questions about, in your idea of school and American schools, and we can speak directly to American public schools, this intersection of academic excellence and rigor and then values clarification that's happening, very concerning for parents. And they're trying to understand, is there a way forward for public education really in this time in America when it seems like our values are so divided?
Yeah. Look, individual parents may decide that the public schools aren't for them. This issue, if we're able to solve it or able to address it effectively, is still going to be years away. And you may send your kids to a school where you just don't want your kids educated in that fashion, and that's fine. In the meantime, there will be thousands upon thousands of American kids going through public schools. And I have a stake in the public education system, if for no other reason that a lot of kids are going to be educated in them and be voting members of our society. And I want them to obviously learn how to read and write and do basic arithmetic. I want them to believe in the United States of America and our basic democratic principles. And I don't want them to hate me or hate the country. And so I have a stake in that fight, even if my own kids weren't in it. I have my oldest son graduated from Jewish day school. My younger son went for a while, but also went to public schools. I have a stake in it. I have stepkids who went through the public education system here. I have a stake in the education system, even if my own kids are not in it.
We feel the same way at Moms for Liberty. Many of our moms are homeschooling or have kids in public school and private school, but we're still engaging in the public schools because the idea that children are being taught to hate America in our schools and divided amongst each other is just not acceptable. There's no future for America in that. So, David, but before we end today, I want you to talk a little bit about the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values and some of the work you're doing. But let's head to some questions, and before we end, we'll make sure that we get you get to talk about your organization a bit.
Sure.
Great. So now I'd like to open up the questions. And we'll start with our live questions. I know we've asked some chapter members across the country to ask some questions. And so let's see. I think the first question is from Brooke Weiss, if Brooke is with us, or Abigail. We have two. I see two questions here. So, there's Abigail. Hey, Abigail, how are you?
Good morning. Hi, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. First of all, I want to give I'm going to give Abigail a shout out on every single book club we do. David, Abigail does the most beautiful book summaries. I think she really enjoyed your book, and I'm excited to hear her question.
Thank you, Abigail, for reading it and reviewing it.
Thank you. It was a wonderful book. My question is about these protests we've been seeing all over college campuses, the pro-Palestinian, anti-Israeli protests, and some of them have been very violent. And my question is, what has the reaction been? Are they helping to open people's eyes to how anti-Semitic woke culture has become, or do you think they might be promoting anti-Semitism?
I mean, they can be doing two things at once, Abigail. They can obviously be promoting anti-Semitism, which I think they are. What you're seeing here, why this is so threatening, is you're seeing what we're calling the Red-Green Alliance, which is the alliance of the radical progressive left with radical Islamist ideology. And you're seeing activists on these universities who are influential, radical activists from the Arab world very often, who are influential within these progressive circles and are becoming a dominant voice in leading these movements. So to us, that's very scary. It's been around in Europe for actually couple decades, but it's really taking shape now on U.S. college campuses and elsewhere. At the same time, I think that they've raised awareness among a lot of American Jews that they have a problem that they were ignoring for a long time. I have so many stories about this where I've been speaking to a Jewish group and I get introduced in this way that only I can be introduced in, which is, well, David may say some things that may be a bit controversial. Please hear him out. If that's a good introduction for me, and so I go around and I find out that this is after October 7th, almost everybody in the room agrees with me, and then I get to the one progressive firebrand who's in the room, who everybody is worried is going to be offended, and that person, and this is a real life example, says, "I don't even know who I am anymore. I don't know where I fit in. I thought that I had allies on the left." And now the same people I've worked with my entire life on all kinds of causes like homelessness and the like are telling me that Israeli women weren't really raped by Hamas on October 7th. And they're not I don't know who I am anymore. That's what we're feeling from a lot of people who have been on sort of the progressive left in the Jewish community. And they feel like, I think, in a kind of political no man's land right now.
That was a great question, Abigail. I think so many people have the same question. David, I'm not going to lie. I've heard that Josh Shapiro is being considered to be a VP candidate to go with Kamala Harris. I don't really understand how he can rectify her position on Israel and what's been happening with his faith. I mean, he seems to me, I know this will sound, maybe I'm offensive, but, I was raised Catholic, and Joe Biden is as much of a Catholic as, I mean, he supports abortion. So and we may disagree on that issue, but for me personally, as a Catholic, I have a hard time with that. So how are people squaring some of what they're seeing on the left or with the Democrats or not? I mean, it's not that Ilhan Omar is saying it, it's that she's saying it, and then you have people who aren't saying anything else different to her.
Yeah, look, I mean, you can answer that in two ways. One is that, Josh Shapiro might put himself in some serious dilemmas that he's not uncomfortable with. Another is, she could win. And if she wins, would I rather her have a Josh Shapiro as a VP and perhaps a future president, or somebody on the far left? And I heard Pete Buttigieg. I don't think he's a far left, but he's certainly not
Oh,
where
he's a
Josh
far
Shapiro
left. His
is.
father was a
Yeah,
Marxist. He was
right.
translating Gramsci's work. He is. He's a red
Right.
diaper baby, no doubt. Sorry.
Okay, all right. I'll take your word for it. So would I rather would I be more comfortable if Josh Shapiro were there than Pete? Yeah, I would. Would I want to be in Josh Shapiro's shoes in that situation? No, I wouldn't.
Yeah. No doubt. And I'm just going to put, for those about Josh Shapiro, if you really want to find out who he is, I'm not going to lie. He promised that he was going to get school choice passed in his state, and then he reneged on that once he was elected governor. And so that was a real disappointment to many parents who very much wanted to have options for their children. David, at Moms for Liberty, we believe every parent has that fundamental right to direct the education of their child. And so that to me is one of the most concerning things. I don't like politicians who lie. All right, next question. Who is up next? Thank you, Abigail. Do we have Thomas Davis from Harris County, Texas? Let's see. It's like, I need a wheel of questions. Or Kit, if Kit wants to join us. Kit Hart from Carroll County, Maryland, and Montgomery. You mentioned Montgomery County. While we're waiting for Kit, I'll tell you, David, you have you have a wonderful champion in Montgomery County, Bethany Shondark Mandel, who ran for school board, a Jewish mom of 6, who is a homeschool mom, but cared enough about Montgomery County to run. Montgomery County has a number of really concerning issues, Maryland in general. So welcome, Kit. I'd love to hear your question.
Thank you, David. And thank you, Tiffany. David, your book was very enlightening. Thank you so much for writing it and for being a part of this discussion today. I really loved what you said and how you kind of differentiate now between the far left and liberals. And coming from a family, my in-laws consider themselves liberals, but not leftists. And I think leftists, you kind of mentioned that leftists have weaponized kindness in a way so that they've really separated themselves from true liberals. And in your book, you created a list of action steps to restore liberalism in its rightful form, not only in American society, but in Jewish life and religious life in particular. And I was wondering if you could just summarize that and maybe expound on those list of action steps.
Yeah, sure. Well, some of these are for the individual, like what can individuals do? And, I'm sure you've probably said it. I think individuals need to be more courageous, and courage is contagious. So when one person pushes back against something that they're afraid of, it makes it easier for the next person to do the same. And the more that we can actually find people and make common cause with them, the more that we can go in. When you go into this, the principal's office, you're not just by yourself, but you're with 3 other parents when you're doing it, the more likely you're going to make an impact. So I think we have to find community among people who agree that there's a big problem and who want to fight back against that problem. And we need to provide people tools with that. The thing is, I think it's important for people to start building new coalitions. And maybe this is aimed more at the Jewish community. The Jewish community, since the civil rights era, has really been in coalition with progressive civil rights organizations. It will, of course, engage others, and it does engage others, but its primary coalitions are on the left. And I think it's time for us to get to know some new people. To really get to know them. I think that there are Asian American groups who don't want their kids magnet school to be shut down or the AP class to be ended. There are African American parents, as you mentioned, Tiffany, who don't want their kids to be told the system is rigged against them.
That's right.
And that would work with us on trying to restore sanity in our public school system. So I want us to dig a little deeper and find new coalition partners who are willing to push back against radicalism and to push for what you might call American values in the broadest sense. We don't have to agree on everything, by the way. There are a lot of things we can disagree with each other about and still work with each other on these core issues. I want to live in an American society that emphasizes opportunity. and pluralism and freedom, and open inquiry. And if people are willing to work with me, if they're on the right, that's wonderful. Let's work together. If they're on the left, let's work together. And I think that there's an opportunity to build a coalition, let's say from the 30-yard line to the 30-yard line. And to me, that's what I would recommend the Jewish community to do. And I want to be in partnership with other communities in that process.
That was a great question.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. David, so when I was on school board, it's interesting. I want to talk about, let's talk about the Southern Poverty Law Center and ADL for a second, right? You talk about the Jewish community or Jewish people being connected to very progressive organizations. Those are two, I think, that come up and do a lot of training for teachers and in schools. When I was on school board, I found out that the Southern Poverty Law Center was going to do a training in my community. I think it was called the Teaching for Tolerance training or something like that. They were going to hold it at the local synagogue. And I went to a number of my friends who were members of the synagogue, and I just tried to explain to them how this wasn't, that while I understood that the idea behind this was good, that the Southern Poverty Law Center coming and doing that training, that they were not an organization that we should be inviting into our community. Fast forward, what is it? Oh gosh, 6 years later, and the Southern Poverty Law Center puts Moms for Liberty on a hate map next to the KKK. Yeah. Right. And I've got my 18-year-old daughter saying, Mom, you're next to the KKK on the hate map. And so how have these organizations that proclaim to be such defenders of Judaism or Jewish people, how have they been able to get to the point to have the influence that they have?
Yeah. So let me distinguish between the two that you mentioned. Southern Poverty Law Center is not explicitly a Jewish organization. There were Jews involved in the founding. I know there's still Jews involved in the organization, but it is really a progressive organization. ADL is more complicated. ADL is an organization that has different wings to it. And someone described it to me, I thought quite aptly, as an organization at war with itself right now. I think that there are people at the ADL who understand that this ideology that we speak of is a fundamental threat to the Jewish people, and that there are others who, continue to stick to the sort of oppressor binary and to teach that. I don't know where the ADL is going. I don't know. I couldn't even tell you precisely where it's at right now, but I do know that there's an internal struggle over these issues within the ADL. And you find that in a lot of the mainstream Jewish organizations. When I first started this out my book first came out, the idea, people would deny that there is an oppressor ideology, or the degree that they might even agree with it they wouldn't believe that it actually has any impact. It was sort of a denial. After October 7th, most mainstream Jews connect the dots. And I do not get that much flack. What I think it's for the organizations that are these big ships, it takes a while for them to change. Maybe they'll never change. But I think a lot of the internal leadership probably would quietly agree that there's a big problem, but haven't yet quite pivoted in the way that I would hope.
So for groups, for schools, private schools that are in public schools too, but that are interested in teacher professional development training around these issues or doing work with students on these issues, does the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values or other organizations offer professional development and curriculum? Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So we are developing our own ethnic studies curriculum that is simply about various ethnic communities in California and elsewhere. We are staying away from all these ideological hot buttons. We're trying to give schools that are mandated to teach ethnic studies, and they're mandated by the state of California to teach ethnic studies, an alternative route that doesn't require them to indoctrinate kids in oppressor ideology. That is in the final stages of development now, and we will have something for this school year ready to go. And we will do some teacher training, although I would like to think that there are other Jewish organizations that will be created in the days ahead that will take the mantle of teacher training on. I mean, I feel like my organization, which is this smaller organization, is stepping into this breach because no one else wants to do these really important things.
Welcome to the fight, David. I don't know what to tell you.
Exactly. And then I'm accused by whatever foundation of spreading myself too thin. If someone else would do these things, we wouldn't have to. So I'm not, but we are very devoted right now. We're going to focus almost exclusively on K through 12 education. We feel like we've shared our piece to the Jewish community. And right now, the problems in K through 12 are such that it's spreading very rapidly, this ideology in schools. We're seeing in places where we didn't think we would see it so quickly, like, Evanston, Illinois, and various suburbs of Chicago and Philly. And I know you see this as well. And I could name the cities, and they probably are cities where you're experiencing all the problems as well. And we are not just fighting on anti-Semitism. We are fighting for American values, Western values. We believe that's the best bulwark against anti-Semitism. And
I agree.
Working with parents. There's a lot of Jewish parents, by the way, that are in WhatsApp groups talking to each other about what their kids are bringing home from school.
Tell them to join Moms for Liberty, David. Please tell them to join us. Tell them to join Moms for Liberty.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, because you talk about seeing this in pockets where you wouldn't expect it. This is intentional. This is 50 years of captured institutions, the long march where, specific pilot programs have been put into different areas to change the way that our students think about America, the way that students think about men and women and traditional gender roles, all kinds of things like that. And so Moms for Liberty moms have been seeing it, you're right, all over the country.
Yeah, I think we've got to reverse engineer some of what they've managed to do. I think we've got to start creating our own teacher professional development programs that emphasize critical thinking and classical liberal values and inquiry, and bring them streams of thought that they haven't necessarily been exposed to. Because I think many teachers have been exposed to only one way of looking at the world. And they did that. And in some cases, by the way, it's been in the last 10 or 15 years. I mean, I was listening to somebody tell me about how the New York City school system evolved. And the radicals really took power in the last 10 or 15 years, but weren't as dominant as they are today. And as soon as October 7th came in, it gave them a permission structure to be extreme on, teaching of Israel and the Palestinian issues and the like. But that's been festering for about 10 or 15 years. And it came through teacher professional development programs where the schools would bring in a radical actor, you know the story, a consultancy firm of some kind, maybe partner with a university that has a radical department, and then would train these teachers who then become sort of the political bloc behind the ideology in the schools. I think we've got to reverse engineer that and start doing some of that ourselves. It's longer term work. It doesn't fix things overnight, but if we don't do it, then you have these permanent bureaucracies in the schools that continue to be, to be vectors of transmission.
100%, totally agree. I think we have one more question from Jamie Hinkle, I believe, one of our chapter chairs from Virginia. And then we'll see if there are any audience questions. Hey, Jamie.
Hi. Tiffany did not tell you I'm from Fauquier County, Virginia, which neighbors Loudoun County.
And I don't like to say the name of her county.
You might screw it up.
That's right. In chapter 9, you mentioned a parent that went before her school board to call out, that the school system is using terms such as white supremacy and systematic racism, which trickles down through the classroom. I mean, we're seeing this in our social emotional learning curriculums, which we've been, very vocal, speaking out against about our school board here in Fauquier. But where are we seeing this? I know Pat mentioned in the chat that now they're seeing pro-Palestinian curriculums being pushed into the school districts. I mean, how can we combat this? The conversations that we can have with our school boards and principals and teachers as parents and leaders in our community.
Yeah, first of all, we have to know what's going on. And one of the things I push parents to do is to do a really thorough audit. If it requires a FOIA request, do the FOIA request. I would ask a lot of questions. Like someone asked me the other day, how do I fight anti-Semitism in schools? I was visiting a community bordering the New York metropolitan area. And I said, first, figure out what's going on and do your homework, do the deep dive. Ask a lot of questions, ask for every social studies curriculum in the schools, and then spend some time going over, bringing people like us or you or whoever to help you evaluate it. there are certain signs, and we're developing some diagnostic tools that this is happening. And sometimes we're on the lookout for new trends, and there's always new trends. And the Toronto schools recently officially adopted something called anti-Palestinian racism. Now, you might say, okay, isn't that bad, anti-Palestinian racism? Well, what they actually mean by anti-Palestinian racism is that if you don't go along with the Palestinian narrative, which is the Nakba, in other words, the Nakba in Arabic means disaster, that Israel was created. If you don't go along with that, that's like denying the Holocaust. So therefore, you are a racist. And that's obviously insidious and complete indoctrination. And yet they adopted it. My organization did a backgrounder on the newest trend, anti-Palestinian racism. The researcher who worked on it, Mika Hackner, also wrote an opinion piece in the Jewish Journal on anti-Palestinian racism. And she said, it's coming to a theater near you. And within 2 weeks, I kid you not, we were seeing examples of anti-Palestinian racism in school systems and legislatures, even I think in one of the medical associations will start to use the term. So they start by normalizing the term anti-Palestinian racism. And it might, in the earliest stages, it might be fine. It might be just another example of bigotry or whatever. But then they do this bait and switch. Yep. And so now the term no longer just means hostility toward Palestinians, but it means any denial of the Palestinian view of the world. The official Palestinian view of the world is now a form of racism. That's what they're trying to do. And I think that's what we've got to be on the lookout for constantly. So it's not something you can create the handbook for parents, and I'm sure you have, and we have as well. But the handbook has to be constantly updated because there are new forms of this constantly on the horizon.
Perfect. Thank you so much. As Tiffany will tell you, or becoming a Moms for Liberty member, it's the constant pulling behind the educational curtain and asking the question. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And that's why the book clubs are so important. David, that's why we're so thankful that you wanted your book to be included, that you come for the interview. Our moms our mission statement is to unify, educate, and empower parents to defend their parental rights at all levels of government. And truly, the family is under attack. Parental rights are under attack. And the government seems to think that they know better than parents for their children. And we know that's not true. Parents have the fundamental right. That's a God-given right. It's not a right the government gives you, and it's not a right that they can take away, certainly not easily. You don't have the right to abuse your kids, but you have the right to raise them as you see fit. David, I really appreciate you joining us. Everyone should go out and get David's book, Woke Antisemitism. In closing, just tell us a little bit more about the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values and what you hope to accomplish in the coming years and how we can help you.
Yeah. So we were created 3 years ago when so many other groups were created, I'm sure not that far behind you, in 2021 May, when we warned the Jewish community that there was an ideology that was setting in that was both inimical to classical liberal values and also hostile toward the Jewish community, and that we should start to fight it. And we built an organization around that. It was mostly aimed at the Jewish community, trying to get the Jewish community to connect the dots between radical ideology they were seeing but didn't quite understand and the anti-Semitism they started to experience. But as time has gone on, we realized that there are certain battles that we had to fight, including and especially K through 12 education. And we saw that some of the mainstream groups that we thought would fight the good fight on things like ethnic studies were only fighting at the most surface level. They were fighting the anti-Semitism that they would see, but they weren't fighting the underlying ideology in the schools, that oppressor ideology that was producing the anti-Semitism. And to us, if you don't do that, it's just a game of whack-a-mole. So we started getting very involved in K through 12 education and are helping parents understand that they can't just fight it at the surface level. They have to fight it at the root. And so that's our sort of new mission. We are much more focused now on the K through 12 battle. Again, not only on anti-Semitism, but on the much larger set of values that we think are fundamentally under assault in our school system and that we have to stand up for. And so we're always glad to do that with partners. And I really feel fortunate to be here with you and Moms for Liberty. And thank you so much for having me, Tiffany.
Oh, you're so welcome. Give us your website, David, so that we can all go check it out right now.
Yeah, jilv.org, jilv.org. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for watching and participating in the book club. We really appreciate all of you for joining us. Next month, we will be sitting down with Riley Gaines to discuss her book, Swimming Against the Current. We didn't even dive into that, David, and all of the gender nonsense and confusion that's being sown in the classrooms, but I have a feeling that you'll be addressing that, since that is an attack on our Western civilization as well. So thank you, David, for joining us today. It was an honor speaking with you. Just one last piece of wisdom or advice and encouragement as we go on about our day and this fight to save America.
Stay courageous. We need your courage.
And on that note, we need your courage, moms, joyful warriors. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for joining us.